Hello everyone, welcome to this presentation on using Cli-Fi to help reframe young people's responses to climate change. My name is Judith Wakeman. I am a teacher librarian with a background in teaching mathematics, earth science and information technology. During 2019, I became aware of the extent of eco-anxiety in the broader community. And by the end of 2019, I realized that Cli-Fi, or climate fiction, could help address eco-anxiety. This presentation is not about climate change or youth activism or how to talk to climate change deniers. I am concerned about the 25% of young Australians who think the world will end before they get old, and the 66% of teens who say that climate change makes them feel helpless and afraid, and the 10% who believe it is too late to do anything about climate change. And why, when 88% of teens say climate change is an important issue for them, 75% of teens have not taken any action against climate change, and 90% of young people sometimes or rarely or never talk about climate change to friends or family. Because silence, inaction and denial are unhealthy responses to climate change. But Cli-Fi can encourage more healthy responses. In this presentation, I'll be looking at harnessing the power of stories, eco-anxiety and young people, the psychology of denial and the barriers to action, what's special about Cli-Fi, looking at harnessing young adult authors, school librarians and teachers as allies, a brief look at developmental bibliotherapy and where you can find some Cli-Fi recommendations, resources and further reading. Stories explain the world, calm our fears, preserve ancient wisdom and prepare us for the future. Stories inspire us to improve, validate our experiences, encourage us to explore, reframe our problems, reflect us on our journey, empower us to act and speak, stimulate curiosity and discussion. They can be shared or kept private, they don't make judgments, they engage our emotions and they make us feel normal. They teach us ancient wisdom, language and literacy, compassion, empathy, emotional resilience. They teach us failure is okay and they teach us vicariously. They give us role models, fallible heroes, questions, answers, comfort, company and a sense of identity. And they help us define our goals, celebrate others' successes, create order out of chaos, appreciate diversity, create distance, perspective, help us identify our values, develop our social skills, accept our past and face our future. By activating the default mode network, by cultivating core confidence, by demystifying mental illness, and by reframing eco-anxiety. The default mode network is a network of interacting brain regions active when we are occupied in non-task related thought. It is active during REM, while daydreaming, and while reading. The default mode network is responsible for all the processes that make us who we are as individuals and as members of society. It is responsible for forming our personal narrative, forming autobiographical memories of facts and events about ourselves, self-reflection, self-knowledge, understanding our personal traits, our character, personality, strengths and weaknesses. It is responsible for developing the theory of mind, empathy, moral reasoning, interpreting social information including stereotypes and social cues, adapting to different social situations and interpreting narratives. It is responsible for forming memories, filing, recalling and applying memories, imagining the future and comprehending narratives. It is responsible for applying insight and intuition, the aha moments, spontaneous thought, autopilot mode, enabling snap decisions in unexpected situations, creativity and confidence in problem solving and lateral thinking. It is responsible for adopting vicarious learning, core confidence and emotional resilience, interpreting simulations and making predictions. It's responsible for helping us understand logic and patterns, assimilating new ideas, interpreting narratives, creating order from chaos, identifying patterns, logical thought processes, and making sense of the world. Reading activates the default mode network because the default mode network is active when we are thinking about ourselves or others, when we are remembering or reflecting on the past, when we are planning for the future, and when we are interacting in social contexts, even when we are experiencing these activities vicariously. Cultivating core confidence. Alexander Stajkovic defined core confidence as an amalgam of hope, efficacy, resilience, and optimism. Hope is defined as having realistic goals and manageable pathways. Stories help us identify the dreams and values which form the basis of our goals. With hope, we become flexible and adaptable, and we keep going when faced with adversity. Hope is what gets us out of bed in the morning. Efficacy is the belief in our ability to create change. Efficacy is the confidence we need when we learn new things. With efficacy, we take responsibility for our own lives and for the lives of others. Efficacy is cultivated primarily through mastery, but also through vicarious experiences. Resilience is the ability to recover from setbacks. Reading about resilient individuals shows us that resilience can be learned and developed. Resilient individuals embrace new ideas and new experiences. They are curious, reflective, and mindful, and take responsibility for their own well-being. And optimism. Optimism is a realistic belief in a bright future, a belief that we are responsible for our own happiness and that more good things will continue to happen to us in the future. When we read about ordinary people achieving extraordinary successes or performing extraordinary deeds, we are learning vicariously. We come to realize that the brain is flexible and adaptable, that both intelligence and confidence can be developed, and we start to adopt a growth mindset where we believe that our basic abilities can be developed through dedication and hard work, and we embrace a love of learning and a resilience essential for great accomplishment. A word of caution though, we need to be realistic. Too much hope can cause inaction. Too much efficacy can breed arrogance. Too much resilience can make us overly tolerant, resigned, or apathetic, and too much optimism can create unrealistic illusions. Even so, too much is much better than too little. Demystifying mental illness. Is it a coming-of-age thing, or is it a disaster thing? 70% of young people in the USA say that mental health is a major concern. In Australia, in any given year, 1 in 7 adolescents will experience a mental illness. And 25% of mental health issues first present during adolescence. But teens rarely discuss mental health issues with their peers. Reading about people experiencing mental health issues can encourage empathy and compassion, promote efficacy, introduce appropriate language and promote discussion, address and deconstruct stigmas and stereotypes, replace fear with information, remove feelings of isolation, provide role models, validate experiences, create distance and perspective, and increase awareness of developing mental health issues. By increasing awareness, understanding, empathy, and compassion, by introducing language, addressing stigmas and stereotypes, and providing accurate information, stories help to enable early intervention and so help to mitigate the disruption caused by mental illness. If I were to use one word to describe how I believe young people feel towards climate action and change today, it would be anxiety. Eco-anxiety is defined as a chronic fear of environmental doom. It could also be called climate anxiety, solastalgia, ecological grief, or pre-traumatic stress. However, there are no statistics on the incidence of eco-anxiety across the globe. In fact, eco-anxiety is not considered to be a medical condition in itself. It can affect anyone, regardless of age, education, agency, spatial or temporal proximity, and it can manifest in many ways. And yet, the impact of eco-anxiety has yet to be acknowledged in traditional scientific, educational, or economic frameworks. It is not a thought she lingers on, for to consider it is to invite a different type of grief, an awareness of what is being lost, extinguished as the animals disappear one by one, the irreplaceable wonder of their knowledge of the world wiped away with them. James Bradley in Ghost Species is talking about solastalgia here, the pain, sickness, or desolation you feel when your sense of place is under attack. Young people are most vulnerable to eco-anxiety. They are likely to experience the most severe effects of climate change. They are powerless, angry, and frustrated at the inaction. And in the event of a natural disaster, their social networks will be first affected and most severely affected. Their personal values, coping mechanisms, and inner resources are not so well developed. They are more likely to experience unreasonable guilt, grief, trauma, and fear. They are less able to identify or articulate their need for help or information. And their trusted go-to people may not be available or reachable. This data is from the survey responses from teens aged 13 to 17 years from the Kaiser Family Foundation Washington Post Climate Change Survey of 2019. 88% say that climate change is an important issue, and 80% are fairly or very certain that humans are causing climate change. 30% say we have just 2 years to take action to prevent the worst effects of climate change, and a further 12% say that we have 3 to 10 years. And yet, only 10% regularly discuss climate change with their friends or family. In this graph, how people feel when they think about climate change, teens and 18 to 29-year-olds are the first two columns on the left. You can see that they're afraid, they're motivated, and they feel helpless, and they feel guilty. From the same survey, 15% say they are learning a lot about climate change and how to mitigate it. And this figure is down by 40% from the 2014 survey. What this is saying is that 80% are learning a moderate amount or less, which might indicate that many are dissatisfied with their education on climate change. 25% have taken some form of action on climate change. 40% believe their generation will be harmed. 10% say it is too late to stop climate change. 20% are not interested. 25% never discuss climate change with friends or family. But in the face of climate change, eco-anxiety is considered to be a valid, rational, and appropriate response. The coping mechanisms of fight, flight, or freeze are similar to those for clinical anxiety. However, fight is considered to be the only adaptive or healthy response to climate change, because climate change is a very real and existential threat. Because the action taken on climate change is not matching the scale and urgency of this threat, and because ignoring climate change will not make it go away. Richard Eckersley defined activism as the place where hope rules. In the context of eco-anxiety, action encourages conversations and connectedness, resilience, self-efficacy, hope, and optimism. Validation, trust, information, empowerment, outward thinking, awareness of broader issues, and hope. Because hope is the antidote to despair. But with many children terrified, anxious, and depressed about climate change, where do we draw the line between responsible education and alarmism? And how can Cli-Fi inspire young people to embrace the fight response to eco-anxiety? Before we understand how Cli-Fi can help, we need to have a look at climate change denial. It's complicated. But it is worth remembering that climate change deniers are in the minority, that most governments are taking some action on climate change, that denial is a maladaptive or unhealthy response to climate change, and that there is an important distinction between denial that is personal and psychological and denial that is institutional and organised. Of the latter, how did a handful of conservatives in a handful of industries in a handful of countries all but guarantee the ecological, societal and economic systems collapse caused by runaway climate change despite decades of global research, simulations, models and warnings from 99% of climate scientists? The merchants of doubt used friends in high places, psychological manipulation, to discredit the scientists, to discredit the scientific methods, to discredit the evidence, and to confound and confuse the public. On the surface, personal and psychological denial is just as complex. The personal reasons fall into 6 main categories: fear, proximity, self-efficacy and agency, identity, perception of risk, and education. But whatever the reasons, there are consequences to this maladaptive response to eco-anxiety. On individuals, it can manifest as despair, numbness, apathy, nihilism and fundamentalism. It can leave us feeling hopeless, powerless, paralysed, guilty and confused. And it can lead to a loss of self-efficacy, self-sufficiency, self-reliance and self-determination. On society, it can lead to societies where decadence or dogma rules, and self-interest plays out in what's called the tragedy of the commons. An example of that is the hoarding that we saw during COVID-19. The consequences of denial on the planet are runaway climate change, cascading tipping points, social, economic and environmental systems collapse, and yet only 10% of adults and children regularly talk to family and friends about climate change. We are now at a time when everyone with any sight into the climate crisis that threatens our civilization and the entire biosphere must speak out in clear language, no matter how uncomfortable and unprofitable that may be. Greta Thunberg from January 2019. But people don't like talking about things that make them feel unhappy. Cli-Fi and developmental bibliotherapy can help start that conversation. Within the pages of a book, using the power of narrative and the voices and actions of heroes, young adult Cli-Fi authors share essential messages with young people. Using developmental bibliotherapy with Cli-Fi, we can activate the default mode network, we can cultivate core confidence, we can promote discussion, and we can reframe responses to eco-anxiety. Developmental bibliotherapy is simply guided reading programs for teens, run by trusted adults during informal lessons like class time, using young adult fiction. Designed to help teens navigate adolescence with authentic role models, insight and guidance, and information and understanding. Its purpose is to promote and nurture well-being as a preventative strategy. Trusted authors are an important part of developmental bibliotherapy. They are valued for their honest and authentic portrayal of young adult issues and their genuine sense of responsibility to their young readers. Provide young adults with stories about authentic role models and fallible heroes, autonomy and independence, but with trusted adults as safety nets. They provide adventure and excitement, consistency and honesty, with information, answers, guidance and hope, but without being overly didactic. They provide community, but at the same time confirmation and validation of themselves as individuals. They provide a wider view of normal, and they allow us to feel normal, and they provide hope for the future. Teacher librarians can help. Librarians are trusted, they are easy to find, they don't set tests, they are good at asking the right questions, they are good at listening to answers, and they love talking about books, and they especially know young adult literature. Librarians are non-judgmental, they know about trigger warnings, they identify reading patterns, they are helpful, sharing and caring, they can stop and chat. Students feel safe in the library. Some students are different people in the library, but almost every student has met the school librarian at least once. There are many reasons why young people do not talk about climate change, but silence on climate change is a form of denial. It is a maladaptive and unhealthy response to climate change. In the classroom, Cli-Fi can raise awareness of climate change in non-personal and non-threatening ways. It can help explain scientific concepts and terminology, stimulate discussion and initiate investigation, present and answer questions, encompass diversity, address fears, reaffirm values, nurture confidence, and encourage emotional resilience. But it can also help start the conversations so that hope can triumph over despair. Cli-Fi alone will not stop climate change, but in guided reading programs, Cli-Fi can help young people develop a growth mindset and embrace the adaptive or healthy fight response to climate change. Before I go, some recommended reading. Non-fiction and fiction. Top of my list on this page would have to be The Collapse of Western Civilization by Naomi Oreskes. But also, if you wanted to have a look at the young adult selection, Neil Schusterman's Dry and C.A. Fletcher's A Boy and His Dog at the End of the World are wonderful examples. Many young people have climate anxiety, which is why education is important in enabling them to see the opportunities and not just the gloomy prospects for the future. Ursula Munster. Cli-Fi can help address the needs of the 85% of teens who say their education does not include a lot about climate change, and the 90% who say they do not regularly talk about climate change. Ever since humans harnessed fire to extend their days beyond sundown, stories have been shared to explain the world, to calm our fears, to preserve ancient wisdom, and to prepare us for the future. Cli-Fi authors continue that tradition. For more information on how to implement developmental bibliotherapy, including book lists, lesson plans, activities and printables, or to have a look at the bibliography and further reading for the presentation today, please visit my website on readforlife.today.